Welcome to this Heroes podcast video thing where we're going to talk about storytelling and communication. And today we have a treat for you. Heather Thompson-Day is a doctor in communication specializing in storytelling. We will talk to her for the next few minutes about the power of heroes and storytelling. Heather, thank you for joining us in this video.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. What a great topic to dig into.
So you wrote your thesis on storytelling. Tell us more about that.
I did. So I am a professor. And so I wanted to study whether or not professors who use stories in lectures create a higher level of engagement in their classrooms. And you can guess what happened. We found out that they did. There was a strong connection to students just feeling like they can bring themselves as themselves, feel like they can raise their hand, actually even do their homework, and whether or not the professor told a story. So it's a really powerful tool for communication and for engagement.
I don't remember exactly who said it, but it was never tell a story without a point and never make a point without a story. Why are stories so powerful in communicating whatever it is that someone wants to communicate?
So this is, to me, the most fascinating thing about story is that it actually releases oxytocin. So, for example, they did this study where they wanted to see if they could raise more donations for some things that were happening in a country in Africa. And they tested two versions of a request letter. The first one gave all the stats about everything that was wrong and all the issues and how they needed help. And there's this many thousands of people who need your donation. And then the other letter simply told a single story of a little girl named Rokia. And what they found was participants who read the first letter, they ended up giving them like $5 for completing some survey. But that was just a setup to give them cash so that then when they handed them the letters, they would have actual money in their pockets that they could then choose to donate to these two Save the Children foundations. And the people who read the letter with all of the stats and figures and numbers ended up giving like $1.14. But if you read the story of a single child named Rokia, it upped it by double. It was like $2.38 that they ended up giving. And so what happens when we hear stories is our bodies release this hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is the love drug. It's the love hormone. It's when a woman has a baby, the first thing doctors will do is put that baby on your chest and tell you to nurse it. And it's because as you nurse a baby, your brain releases oxytocin. It tells you, connect to this baby. You love this baby matters to you. Well, guess what? We release oxytocin when we listen to each other tell stories. And for me, that was super powerful as a communicator. It was super powerful as an educator. It was super powerful as a Christian, because oftentimes I will hear people say, oh, I only want to go to a church where he just preaches straight from the Bible. And then I open up my Bible and I read stories. Jesus telling stories thousands of years before all of our fancy neurological research, right? He created the human brain. And so he knew what would happen when we share stories.
There is this whole fascination I have with oxytocin started with the birth of my first son, James. So my wife and I, after 4 or 5 years of marriage, we decided it's time. We're gonna have a child. So in the moment of birth, it was very painful. It was a natural birth. It's always very painful, and you never quite know just how painful this will be. So when we first got to the hospital, when the waters broke and so on, there was this woman giving birth somewhere far from where we were in the maternity ward. And my wife said, I'm not going to be like that. And this woman was howling and swearing. It was awful. And my wife said, don't worry, I'm not going to be like that. 12 hours later, it's excruciating. And what happens, and this was amazing because the nurse had told us that. The nurse told us a few things, the midwife. They told us a few things that were fascinating. They said this was a premarital, no, not premarital. What's it called? Before the birth, they have these lectures. This is in England, by the way. So they have these talks with couples, and we do this in lots of couples. This is part of the NHS, the Public Health Service. And she said, boyfriends, if you're not married yet, before the birth, put a ring on her finger. And everybody's like, what do you mean? I said, it's very simple. The research is clear. When the father of the child is next to the mother as she's giving birth, if she knows he's going to be there for a long time, more oxytocin is produced. Therefore, there's less pain and the whole birth is simpler.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is blowing me away. And I said, look, I'm a pastor. You know, you're preaching this from a scientific perspective, what we say from a theological perspective.
Wow.
She went further. She said, there are two births. There is the birth of the child and the birth of the placenta. And the birth of the placenta should be just as painful as the birth of the child, except that it's often forgotten. Why? Because once the mother has the child and you put the baby in her arms, there is so much oxytocin, as you're saying, flowing through her system that it takes away the pain, it takes away the memory of the pain, and so the birth of the placenta is a non-event for most births, except that when the mother, for some reason, either rejects or the child has to be taken elsewhere and she doesn't have that experience, it's very painful.
Wow.
Isn't this insane?
You are blowing my mind right now, because I've had 3 children, and yeah, the placenta, you don't even know. It's like, it just happens and you have no idea that it's even happened. But also you're staring at this little creation that just changed your life and turned it upside down.
And so I didn't know story produced oxytocin.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So it's like a great thing that we should be using in churches, not just from the pulpit, but when are we allowing members to share stories with each other? Because that changes the entire experience for people as they come in. That's how we actually build community. Hello, small groups.
Do you find some people struggle to tell a good story?
Oh, you know what? I think so in my experience, I teach public speaking, and glossophobia is the number one fear, at least in this country. People would rather die than tell a story in my class. So the first thing that I do in public speaking is I make them tell a story. It's the first speech that they do. They take a story from their life and they explain how the story is symbolic of who they are as a person. And what I've found is there are so rarely bad stories. And I'm not making that up. I have about 200 students every semester. I mean, it changes the entire rest of the class to just allow these people to share stories from their lives. And I think that there's something unique about that, right? Like, there's no story I know better than my own. We call them testimonies, right? In the church. And so when we teach ourselves that it's okay to share them and that it's important that we share them, I think that it's a really important component of just human connection and relationship building.
Let me make a cross-section between communication and psychology. So there is this thing called the Big Five. It's a personality test, and 2 of the dimensions that it measures is extroversion, and part of that extroversion is enthusiasm. There is the general idea that people that are more from fun country, they are more extroverted, that because they probably spoke many more words in their lives than somebody who's very introverted. The idea is if you can be very enthusiastic, like both of us, as I can see, they are better at storytelling. They are better at presenting their story. But I have found that when an introvert that doesn't normally speak, when they decide to take the leap of faith and begin to speak, when they tell a story, it produces immediate silence in whatever room they're in. Because if they are coming out of their shell in order to share something, it's probably because it means that much to them. And if it means this much to them, then it commands attention and people are quiet. So I think, do you find that to be the case?
Absolutely. I tell my students or anybody when they say to me, like, how do you connect to young people so well? I'm like, I believe it. I think we're really attracted. I'm being serious. I think we are really attracted to anybody who says something and just believes it. And you're like, man, either that person's crazy or this is true. It's only one of those 2 things. And I think it's just a really powerful communication technique. It's just to talk about things that you really, truly believe in, not because mom and dad said you should, but because you've had some type of personal conviction and experience. And so then it doesn't matter anymore, extroversion or introversion, or whether I'm a good public speaker. I am telling you, I have watched people share a story, because by the way, your body's going to release oxytocin either way. I have watched people who totally like shaking I just had a girl a couple weeks ago. She grew up in foster care and she's talking about her story of going from 12 different foster parent homes. She is actually shaking in her legs as she's telling it, and you could have dropped a pin. That's how much everybody heard it, because everybody was listening that intently. There is just something really powerful about sharing who we are and believing the words that we're saying and allowing somebody into that journey with us.
So this project that you can see the photos
Yeah.
of, it's a game called Heroes that brings back the heroes of the Bible in a way that restores the narrative. Because I think I've seen that we have created hygienic versions of the biblical stories that are always safe, have no blood, that are always, even the violence, we diminish it into hygienic versions. And boys and men especially, they're just tuned out. The Hallmark movie kind of thing is not what you find in most biblical stories. You find intrigue. You find terrible things. You find wonderful things. You find it because the Bible doesn't hold its back the punches against the very heroes that it's trying to present. So the narrative has the hero being amazing, but the same hero is also terrible and made some mistakes that would make any of us never want to come out of our house again. So how do you think the biblical narratives inform us in that sense of identity as well, who they were compared to who we are? How does knowing the narrative impact our lives, do you think?
Yeah, I think it just makes it super relatable. I mean, I'm a writer, right? So we know that if we are doing character development, the best heroes also have like traits of the villain. And that's why you're connected to them, because all of a sudden I can see myself, because I know that I'm not this perfect sugar-coated peep-like person, right? And so as we go through scripture, you're going to find that can you think of a hero in scripture? Okay, maybe not like Ruth, right? But like, can you think of a hero in scripture that's not also having some traits of a villain? And it's because they're human beings. And then the story isn't even about it. It makes it so much more clear to me that the story is not even about the hero as much as it's about the higher power, God and the Holy Spirit, which is able to work through broken, sinful human beings who, by the way, look just like me. And here's what happens. This is awesome. So here's why it's super important that we also are reading our scripture and knowing these stories. Your brain, when we read a story, automatically puts yourself into the narrative. It's a compulsion that your brain does naturally. So I say this to my students all the time. This is why we have to be super cautious about what we take in. This is why watching certain movies, right? Browsing certain websites, this is really, really bad for your brain. And you can't say, oh, it's not affecting me. That's foolish. It is absolutely affecting you because your brain can't help it. It automatically puts yourself inside the story. But with scripture, it becomes really powerful, I think, because it just makes the experience that more intimate and understanding what God could possibly do through us. And I think I'll add this. I think often as we read these stories of our greatest heroes, let's take Moses, right? We read these stories and we're super inspired, but we also think that these things happened really quickly. And then when God doesn't move quickly in my own life, I feel like something's broken, something's wrong, God doesn't exist, or God doesn't hear me, whatever. But the reality is that though I flipped a page and now he's parting the Red Sea, there's 40 years in between that. David is anointed king at like 17 years old and goes back to tending sheep. Are you kidding me? We don't see David become king of Israel for like 20 more years. There is a huge gap there. And because we flipped a page, we forget those gaps. Like, how long do you think it takes Moses' hope to die? Moses knew he was going to be a deliverer. And so year 1 goes by and year 2 goes by. Okay, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8. You think he's feeling cocky now? Confident in God's plan for his life? This is the reality of the stories we're reading, is that there are years, there is a process that God takes every hero through. And we are an entire generation, I'm really passionate about this. We are an entire generation of people who just want a product. And God says, you don't get a product without a process. There are years that go in this journey that we're not even reading. And I think in those ways, we disservice our own brains to think that if God is going to use me, if I'm meant to be a hero, it's going to happen instantly. Forget that. God always, you show me a hero and I'll show you a process.
That is absolutely incredible. We just want the results, right? But
yes.
we don't see that the difficult parts. You mentioned two of the heroes that are in the game. So David is anointed, right? First, he has no expectations of being anointed, it seems, because he's not the oldest. But here's the other thing that I've noticed, and this, Heather, I noticed this like 3 months ago for the first time. So this is amazing to me. None of the people, it seems, that were chosen to be part of the lineage of Jesus, the children of the promise, that through whom all the families of the earth will be blessed, were the oldest siblings. Which was to be expected. The older sibling is the one who receives the blessing, is the one who is supposed to be the one. But it isn't. Cain isn't. It's Seth. You have Abraham, right? So Abraham is there. His son is not Ishmael, it's Isaac. Mm-hmm. It's not Esau, it's Jacob. Mm-hmm. It's not Simeon, it's Judah. It's not David's older brother, it's David. And and you have obviously Rahab, who's not even, Hebrew.
Right.
She's from Jericho.
And Ruth, the Moabite.
And Ruth, right? So you have all of these examples of God choosing who God will choose. And there is this, in the narrative, you have the call to adventure, where the hero is in the status quo, and then suddenly there is a call to adventure. And when David receives that call, when Samuel visits the prophet and anoints him, he will work in the palace, but just as a musician. Mm-hmm. He's going to defeat the giant against the Philistines. But he goes back to his sheep. He will run away in the caves. It's not that he was ignored, it's that he was outright hunted. Mm-hmm. And he fights for the Philistines later on. In his all those years, it's basically disappointment upon disappointment. It is God. Can you imagine the dreams? Like, God called me for this, but I'm running away. And I don't hear God's voice in the way that I heard it before, but I still worship him. How many of us feel a sense of calling, but God is more interested at first in working within the hero than he is in working through the hero? What if God is just preparing someone throughout their whole lives to have a 5-minute conversation in a plane that would change the course of history for a family or another country?
Right.
Do we surrender to that narrative that God is building throughout our lives, or are we constantly trying to create our own? What is your experience as you look at the numb generation that would rather watch, binge watch Netflix than to enter their process, as you called it out? And I love this. I'm going to take this for life, Heather. You want the product, but not the process. The process matters. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that tension?
I have a lot of thoughts. I'm really passionate about preparing and mentoring and training Gen Z. That's the population I serve. And some things that I've noticed is, well, first of all, let's say this, we will say all these negative things about Generation Z. Are they impatient? Absolutely. The research is really clear. But I also think that they haven't been mentored. I also think that we're looking at a generation that has had, honestly, a really strong lack of adult leadership. And I think that has impacted them. And here's how I know that. I know that because every single day I have students who sit in my office and tell me super intimate things about their lives. And they say, I've never been able to tell anybody this before. And I think it's just that we have really tried to excel and chase our own dreams as adults, that we've forgotten to take care of the people that are coming next, right? Everybody wants to be Moses and nobody wants to prepare Joshua to actually cross into the promised land. And I think that we have really disserviced them. So no 17-year-old kid who's addicted to pornography or has a horrible body image or really low self-esteem, they didn't build this world. They didn't build the world that taught them that or put that in their hands or gave them these things. They are a product of the environment that they've been raised in. And honestly, we built that. And we handed it down to them. And very few of us have stopped to say, oh my goodness, how do I help you walk through this journey? And so all they see, especially this entire generation, is grown up online. So I'm a millennial, I'm 34. And when I was a kid, I had a diary and it had a lock and it had a key and I hid it underneath my bed. Well, this generation's diary is totally put online for thousands. And the more hits, the better. The more people who see it, the better. And so we've, of course, curated our lives to only do the highlights. again, sometimes like maybe what we see in scripture. So I'm only seeing the victories of the battles, and I'm not seeing that person in the quiet time in the closet when they're on the floor and they're crying and they're praying. And I'm not seeing them with the broken heart. I'm only seeing them stand on top. And so then they're comparing their own lives to our highlights as adults. And if we don't take the time to mentor them and be honest and say, no, let me tell you my experience. Let me tell you, for me, Heather speaking, before I published my first book, I probably had, I don't know, like 200 rejections. I do exaggerate, but that number is like real. Like just every publishing house. Sometimes I go to the bookstore, I go to a Barnes and Noble, and I'll just read all the different publishing houses on the back of books. And I'm like, I was rejected by this one and this one and this one, all of them. Right. But all of a sudden, once you get that deal, it doesn't matter anymore. And nobody talks about the rejections anymore. We only talk about the success that we see. And so I think we've really disserviced this generation to not talk about the rejection, because now they are totally unprepared for it. And they shut down at the first sign of rejection because they think that the world has ended and crumbled. And now I'm not picked and I'm not special and I'm not chosen for anything. And so I just really want to encourage any adults who are listening to sit down with your young people and talk to them about the process. It's super important. I have a book coming out June 29. It's called It's Not Your Turn. And essentially the entire premise of the book is this: who we are when it is not our turn is more important than who we will be when it is.
That's very insightful.
Everybody.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, everybody can stand on the mountaintop and give the sermon. Are you kidding me? You think somebody's not going to give the inspirational speech when there are 1,000 people clapping for you? I am telling you, God is looking for a generation of people who will turn the podcast microphone on for 2 listeners. Who you are when it's not your turn is more important than who you will be when it is, because God is looking for people of integrity. I don't even think he's looking for talented people. He can give you that. He's looking for people he can trust, whose hearts he can use, and who will live in surrender and submission to him. And so let's mentor this next generation to be the Joshuas, to cross to the promised land. Let's finish this thing.
Turn up, do your 10,000 hours at the right time. God is going to give you
nobody's
a stage.
clapping and nobody cares and nobody would have known whether you were here or not.
The champion is not made in the ring. As you're talking, it reminded me of this. The champion is not made in the ring. They're merely recognized there.
Yes.
It's in the hundreds of mornings that you get up and you run and you practice and you as we look at how the new generations have tools to handle the frustrations and the difficulties of life, it reminds me of the importance to ask the right question. At this very moment today, I was looking at my Instagram feed, and it's basically a prayer meeting. It's just between death and ICUs, and I'm from Brazil, Heather,
Okay.
and Brazil is going through a really rough time right now, and people are dying, and it's those that are not dying are surviving barely, and so you have the question becomes, there are 2 questions to ask. How could this happen? The world is beautiful and perfect and there is no suffering. How could this suffering happen? And I think that's the wrong question, because to me, the real question is, the world is self-destructing, has been for many years, and suffering is the present reality. How can we, even through this suffering, have moments of joy and happiness?
Yes.
I think asking that question is more realistic and prepares you for the world in a better way, because you will suffer. You
Yes.
will go through struggle. That's the norm. So when you have moments of joy and victory, be thankful and have this gratitude for those moments, because they can be very rare in the great context of the whole world. Sometimes I think, especially Western wealthy civilization, the light is on. Thousands of people have to work with very unattractive jobs to keep the light on, to keep the internet running, to keep us, going to a gas station and actually having gas to pump into our cars so that we can pay such a small amount of money in order to go such distance, which a few hundred years ago would be impossible. The central heating in someone's house, kings and queens did not have that 300-400 years ago. So all of this clash of what is actually reality in a sinful, deprived world help us to know that there are tools. I have a youth group. You mentioned, Genza, I have a youth group, 30, 40 teens, and I meet them every other Friday to, this Friday coming up as well. And when I tell them about, the old self-esteem talk, you are great, you are wonderful, look happy, you are great. That doesn't really hit because they know they're not. They know they're flawed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So for the last many years, even as a pastor, my language has been, you're not ready for the mission that you have.
Mm-hmm.
You're not good enough. You're not. So find the tools and get ready because it's going to get worse. And and the battle is very real. Take the moment that you have in your family and so on and prepare. Use that time to prepare because, in a good pop culture analogy, winter is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Winter is coming, and you need to be ready, be prepared for this. You need to turn up and do your work. So I really resonate with that. Final thoughts about narrative, heroes, and the call to adventure that everyone has at some point in their lives.
Yeah. I say my final thoughts would be live your story and be prepared to share it. Because I really truly believe in the priesthood of all believers. I really truly believe that God is ready and willing to meet every single one of us where we are at in our journey. And I think that the closest to God somebody else may ever get is you. And so we don't have to wait for our pastors to save our boyfriends or our girlfriends or our daughters or our parents. Like the most, I teach communication, the most persuasive person is always the person with the greatest relationship. And so anybody that you are close with and have a relationship with, you are the most persuasive person in that person's life. And so you have to be prepared to give a testimony of your own faith. Don't just say what you believe, tell them why you believe it. And then what have you experienced that has shown them that it's true? And that is your hero story. That's it. And I think we're going to be in heaven and we're going to talk. And I just love this picture that we have in Revelation, right? Of it says, and John says he sees a people of all different tribes and languages. A multitude, he says, that could not even be numbered. My friend David Ashrick says, oftentimes we think, oh, only the few righteous are going to get in. And that's not what John sees. He says it's a tribe that could not even be numbered of all different races and languages and groups. This is going to be a totally diverse group in heaven, so many people. And I can't wait to be a part of it. And I just pray that we will use our own influence in our own lives to share our own stories with the people that we love.
Professor Heather Thompson-Day, thank you so much for joining us in this video. I hope that you can continue to inspire so many generations. I'll be looking forward to your book. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.